Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 2021 edition of the Trinidad and Tobago Film Festival. I'm Tennille Nualo, the Education Coordinator for ttff 21. This year, we have an abundance of films and industry events that consist of masterclasses, workshops, presentations, panels, talks, info sessions, and a new discussion series entitled Ask the Veterans. We'll also have Q&As and we'll be live with the filmmakers. So please be sure to check out our website or social media pages to find all the events or films that you might be interested in. We have a couple more days left, so find what you're interested in. Today, I'd like to welcome you to the Cultural Appropriation and the Caribbean Space panel. All the panels are brought to you with the support of Shell Trinidad and Tobago Limited. So because of our multicultural history, the Caribbean has evolved to become a region overflowing with diversity and creativity. While there are similarities between the nations, each country has its own uniquely expressed culture and an entanglement of traditions and practices brought by different settlers, whether free, enslaved, or indentured. We can be protective of the artistic forms and practices that we've developed over the years because they tell a story of our roots, evolution, and possible future. But given that we are a region built on appropriation, whether forced or organic, can we argue against cultural appropriation? This is the question posed. In this 90-minute conversation, journalist Franka Philip will delve into the effects of cultural appropriation across the Caribbean while giving her own insight into the topic. Our moderator today, so let me give you a little bit of background for her. So in her long journalism career, Franka has followed and reported on many issues that impact society and culture. As features editor of the TNT Guardian between 2012 and 2018, she ensured that stories about outstanding local creatives and events like the ttfilmfestival and the Boca Slit Festival were given prominence in the newspaper. This continues in her current role as co-founder of multi-platform content production company Trini Good Media. TGM was behind initiatives like Festival Radio, the official radio station for Carifesta 2019, and Pat Bishop, Alive, the 5-part documentary series that aired in 2020. So without further ado, I will hand you over to Franka, who will introduce you to the panelists.
Thank you, Tennille, and welcome to our viewers, our friends and family, film festival lovers. I am Franka Philip, as you heard, and I would like to introduce you to our panelists this morning. With us, we have the beautiful Abeo Jackson. Abeo, how are you this morning?
I'm well. Thank you so much for having me. This is really exciting stuff.
Well, Abeo, you are known as a culture advocate. You're also a noted choreographer and a commentator on things cultural, especially things like cultural appropriation, which we will get to soon. And of course, the handsome gentleman up here with me is Mr. Alpha Obika. Alpha, Trini boy, but living in Jamaica. You're a lecturer and a cultural advocate as well, and a cultural critic. So welcome, and let's make this 90-minute ride a fun one. You all are going to be doing most of the talking. I will nod sagely and interject when I think I need to. But I think if we're going to speak about cultural appropriation, we should define what it is. And I've come up with a couple of definitions here, and one that struck me as being very simple and easy for everyone to understand is that cultural appropriation refers to the use of objects or elements of a non-dominant culture in a way that doesn't respect their original meaning, give credit to their source, or reinforces stereotypes or contributes to oppression. So you know that means that cultural appropriation is a very subjective thing. It is nuanced. It is layered. A lot of people may not have a clear appreciation of what it is. And of course, many of us often do it. So there is all of that. So I will start off by asking both of you to give us some recent examples where you felt that elements in the Caribbean have been usurped for cultural appropriation. And what do you think that we can do to guard against it, or to let people know that this is what is happening? I'll start with you, Alpha.
Okay. So thanks again to start the ball rolling. I like the introduction you gave where cultural appropriation is something that is almost a defining factor for us in the Caribbean. We were born out of this violent sense of capitalism meets a very strategic form of racism. And when you think about the formation of Caribbean society and this notion of what is Caribbean cultural identity, it's still something that's very fluid, that's still trying to be formed. It's still something that we're trying to work out as we go along, tapping into the multiple influences. One may or may not agree with the notion of appropriation in the sense that I, as a Afro-Trini or Trinidadian of African descent, claiming African identity, claiming an African name, one may say it's appropriation or not. My name is Obika, Igbo origin, from Nigeria. I'm wearing African clothes. I have a sense of Africanness that one may or may not consider appropriation. But as an Afro-Trini, I also claim Indian cultural identity. I identify with many of the Indian practices based on my experience in Trinidad and Tobago. But if you knew me up to 4 years ago, I also had very long, luscious locks. And I also claimed that an identification with the Rastafarian culture as seen in the Eastern Caribbean. On coming to Jamaica, however, I cut my locks about 3 years later because my own perception of what the locks represented within that particular context changed. So just to answer your question, it's not a very simple answer because as we continue to form our identity, and as technology brings us closer to each other, we're starting to get a greater idea of each other, right? But at the same time, it's also facilitating the use and misuse of cultural practices. And I think in this time, we're going to go into some of the specific examples, but that is my overview of my own notion of what appropriation is. It's a bit of a problematic term, but it also reflects our reality in the Caribbean, but also the Caribbean looking outward as other people appropriate us because we are part of this global village, you know? So that's me coming from my own media perspective. But I am really interested to hear what Abeo says as a practitioner who rumble and tumble in the industry.
So I agree with a lot of what Alpha just said in terms of complexity, and the fact that the term cultural appropriation, it could be a little bit problematic, especially depending on how we frame it. I too am a girl of definitions. I love definitions. I love the definition that Franka went with. And if we're talking about the main red flags for appropriation, we're talking about, again, that giving a skewed or inaccurate perspective of culture, reinforcing of stereotypes, conflict with the intended use of those elements, taking credit or compensation from the original creators. And that's the part that really is the sticking point for me. I tend to write. I tend to write my thoughts. So, I'm just going to share some of the stuff that I would have written in preparation, gathering my thoughts for this morning. In the Caribbean diaspora, where issues as it pertains to regional, country, group, and individual identity are so complex and have always been, and probably will continue to be so, as a result of overarching colonial legacies, slavery, indentured servitude, etc. There are differentiations or demarcations that absolutely must be made when we're discussing cultural appropriation within the context of the diaspora. We are a region of immigrants, forcibly so at one point or otherwise. And we continue to be transient, multi-hyphenated people that create and extend diaspora wherever we go. And as such, there are hybridities that emerge as a result of said assimilation, which again is a differentiation that I think we need to make from appropriation. So for me, those differentiations are what is homage, meaning to give honor to. and what is cultural retention, i.e. the retaining and reimagining of certain aspects of culture of a specific ethnic group of people by descendants, especially when there is reason to believe that a culture or parts of that culture could be lost through inaction, through historical trauma, and how exactly is that represented through cultural expression. Then we have to ask, what is cultural misrepresentation as opposed to what is cultural appropriation? And how do those two things in particular intersect across the lines of race, class, and geography? What role does marginalization and capitalist ideologies inherited from various manifestations of plantation economy through the decades play in the misrepresentation and appropriation? Is it willful? Is it dissonance as a result of not knowing? And if we don't know, why don't we know? And how do those questions of social and cultural awareness / responsibility intersect with our systems, particularly education?
I think you're right. I think you're right. And I think the question that I think people are going to ask most about this whole topic, you raise the point of the intersection. You see, appropriation versus, assimilation versus the expression, the intersection. So, for example, something that we do every year and we revere it, Indian Mass in our carnival.
Yes.
One of my friends is an Ojibwe Indian from Canada. And when I first showed her this, she wasn't sure how to respond to it because she realized that, wait, this is something that they revere, but yet it's like if they're taking on our traditions and passing it into a new tradition. But what I think the overriding thing for her and people like her is, what is your intention? And I think this is something that a point that you made, and it's a point that you made, Alpha, when you talked about your locks. Let's talk a little bit more about the intentions behind the, So what do you think? Like we do it, and then when we see other people doing it, for example, a thing that is very common here. So when Adele appeared at Notting Hill Carnival last year with her hair in cane rows and everything, people came down on her. When Kim Kardashian wears cane rows, people come down on them. But talk to me about that.
For me, there's certain politics, social and cultural politics attached to certain things. If we take in the specific example of people who don't have hair textures that need protective styles, wearing protective styles. For me, it's a matter of our bodies have been subjected, our bodies and our personhood have been subjected to all sorts of stereotypes, stigmatization, traumas, psychological traumas, etc., attached to our personhood. You understand? We still exist in spaces where our hair is politicized. We are not considered professional enough. We're not considered, according to westernized standards of beauty, certain phenotypically identifiable traits are not considered acceptable, so to speak. Yeah. But when you have people from a dominant culture outside of who we are in terms of diaspora doing it, they are applauded, they are validated, as well as they profit off of it. And for me, that's the major thing, the profiting. Because you can't tell me that I can't go into an office with my dreadlocks and earn a salary on a monthly income because it's unprofessional. But then you have people like the Kim K's, et cetera, who do it, and they get, things like endorsement deals, etc., as a result of it. And for me, that capitalist crux of the matter is that, for me, that is the major problem. Because what you're doing is you are taking credit, if even not verbal credit, you are taking financial credits off of something that you did not create without giving back to the spaces out of which they came. And that's colonization. You can call it what you want, but that's what it is.
Alpha?
I have to agree with the notion of colonialism and colonization that is attached to appropriation. Because thinking about the birth of the Caribbean, we're a space born out of that type of oppression. And the notion of Black bodies, both male and female, being used in ways that can be degrading, that can dehumanize us, all right, coming out of slavery and into our modern time. We have to constantly be fighting these forms of misrepresentation, not only in the Caribbean, but even those that are projected about us. Growing up as a young child, seeing images of a whiteness that is akin to goodness, and the mischaracterization of Black persons as either criminal or vulgar. For me, that I've had to re-educate myself. And that is something that many persons who listen to media and are exposed to images, not only from traditional, but also social media, has become a very critical space that is part of this neo-colonial narrative. This neo-colonial narrative where you have social media persons like the Kardashians who dictate to us what beauty is, but in so doing, misrepresent. So it's not only the big capitalist giants that do it. It's not only the big countries that do it. We now have individuals who have obtained significant power, who also now have the responsibility. They don't recognize they have the responsibility because of their increasing influence. I remember Rihanna had to issue an apology for the launch of one of her albums where she utilized, I'm not sure if it's a head covering, all right, or some form of Arabic culture. Now, I mean, you have to look at somebody like a Michael B. Jordan and the whole notion of appropriation, where Juve sounds like such a wonderful concept that you can attach to launch your new rum. And yes, on the one hand, I would have loved to purchase this rum with something that I can really relate to. But coming back to what Abeo says, the capitalist motivation, all right, that caused Michael B. Jordan's team to use the word Juve without fully understanding what it means. And I mean, on the one hand, don't get me wrong, I would have loved if Michael B. Jordan's team would have come to Trinidad and tried to gain an understanding of what the Juve is, right? And in so doing, within full immersion of the culture, we should invite him to a Juve, right? So that he understands what it means, and then he can make the decision as to, okay, with permission, because that's where now, coming from a position of power, using the term without permission and out of context for capital motivation. I mean, it's a classic case, even though as an African American, you know, there are multiple layers.
That situation was so, to me, it was quite a multifaceted approach. I think there are so many things caught up in that as well, not just use of the word Juve, but I think the intellectual property of the word and the application that was made and all of that. And some people kind of misunderstood where or how it was going to be used. But I think it is a lesson for us. It is a lesson for us to understand how we as Caribbean people, we need to put a greater stamp on what our things are. So that when somebody says to me, okay, I'm calling my drink Diwali, right? Okay, I know Diwali is not a Trinidadian or a Caribbean concept totally, but just hear me out on this. Or okay, let me give you another example. Like last week, somebody tagged me in a post on Instagram where they went to a restaurant that sells a variety of ethnic food, quote unquote ethnic food. They sell doubles, they sell tacos, they sell flatbreads. And the person used the word bara to kind of describe a taco, right? And somebody got really annoyed about that. And I had to say, you have to be aware of the motive that the person is using it for. Are they using it as a descriptor? Because if you look at it, a taco and a bara basically do the same thing. But for somebody who's coming into that restaurant, they might associate, okay, the bara is what you use in the doubles thing that they're selling. So it's somewhere in England, eh? But they could also use it as a taco. Okay, that sounds interesting. I will try that. So I think there are things that we have to be very aware of in terms, especially about that whole thing about the intention and about profit. I think those things are extremely important. Abeo, I know that when the Michael Jordan thing came out, I think that one of the things that you ascribed to it was his not understanding the probably what some people would call the spiritual context of what Juve was. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Well, that whole situation, because there were people who were saying because he's African American, he cannot be guilty of culturally appropriation, a tradition that is also African in its root and genesis, etc. However, no group identity across the diaspora is monolithic. Like, there are certain lines and roots. The roots, R-O-O-T-S, and the roots, the R-O-U-T-S. Yes, we all from the same place, but we're different by virtue of where we brought us. Yes? Now, yes, he is African American, but he's also coming, as Alpha said, from a position of power. And the position of power is geopolitical because of who the United States is and where they exist in the whole strata of all of this. So despite of what we know of all of the overt and microaggressions that African Americans endure on a daily basis in the United States, they are still in a position of power coming from a dominant cultural space. So there's that, which makes him extremely capable of appropriating something that comes from, they love to call us third wheel. Yeah. So there's that. And the kind of access and agency that he would have with regards to being able to communicate with the rest of the world via his platforms, etc. That is an important thing to understand. So when you take something like Juve completely out of context, without coming into the space, understanding from whence it came, understanding that it's not just about the pageantry of the festival, but it is also about spirituality, ritual, and some subversion. You understand? It's about rebellion, etc., etc. When you don't understand those things and you go forth and you promote it incorrectly, it does a disservice to the spaces out of which they came. You understand? And we are guilty of that here in Trinidad and Tobago as well, which I made a point of saying during that whole brouhaha and janjat. Because, people were saying, yeah, but we are guilty of cultural appropriation too, in reference of what you were saying for Wild Indian and Black Indian mass. And I feel like that is a dangerous and problematic thing to say out of context, because it could be used for the purposes of gaslighting. It can be used by those who have agency within our own space as an excuse to profit off of the spaces that we like to call hotspots. Understand? Out of which these rituals and cultural expressions actually came. You understand what I mean? We have entities within our spaces who do it too. They make a profit off of it, but the faces that they use, the creatives that they use, the narratives that they tell are so far removed from the spaces out of which those cultural expressions come. However, on the flip side, in terms of us talking, like if we go to use Trinidadian carnival traditions and how we tend to dip here and dip there, and everybody hand in everything, there's that idea of creolization, that there's that idea of transculturalization that's happening in terms of when all these people came into this particular space, none of us necessarily being a dominant culture, because even those who were responsible for colonialism, they were in the minority. You understand? So they're still not dominant. Their descendants may still have a certain level of agency, but they're not dominant. So we don't exist in a dominant majority minority culture. So no one grouping necessarily has ethnic dominance over the other. There may be class dominance. There may be dominance as it pertains to geography and wealth. But all these immigrants came into this space coming with all of their traditions, and new traditions have emerged, so to speak. And that is the greatest example of that is what happens within the carnival, which is why me, a Black woman, if I so chose to, could play a wild Indian mass. My uncle play wild Indian. He whole youthful life.
Yes.
As black as I am. You know what I mean? So, yeah.
I think it also, that point you made about we don't have quote unquote dominant races. I think what we lack in Trinidad and Tobago is a clear understanding by a lot of groups about the traditions of what we do. So, for example, there are a lot of there's a whole section of Trinidad and Tobago that simply does stuff for money, and they will adopt everything that they can, and their excuses are, well, I'm a Trini, so I could do it, right? I think what needs to happen, again, to go back to that whole thing of really strengthening our cultural agency and actually making sure that these things that we own, people can't take them away from us. People can't say, oh, you know, that you can't do that. So that anybody, whether it's a white man, a black man, a Syrian man, a Chinese man, wants to come and play Black Indian mass, he can do it because he is of the place and he understands from whence it came. I think that is very, very important.
I had a question because for me, I'm always fascinated about the power. Carnival emerging from that period of disempowerment, disenfranchisement, very dehumanizing. And then now, from emancipation to the current period, the expression evolving. And yet still, it's a space where one can make the argument that we appropriate basically quite freely. Do we, based on our experiences, I'm flipping the script, Franka, and I'm putting out the question.
You go ahead.
So we as Caribbean people coming out of the experiences that we have had and the forms of expression that emerge from hybridity and tapping into our different experiences, do we believe that we have a license to appropriate in a way? Because the argument can be made. I mean, you take that form of expression, Carnival, to North America. I haven't participated in Labor Day or Caribana, but I am pretty certain, without having participating in those two festivals, that the way it's portrayed is probably different because the environment that it's taking place, even though it's a diaspora, would be different. Do we have a license to appropriate?
I think, again, we need to be really careful the context in which we use appropriation, the way we kind of bandy it about. It's one of those things where, like, you use the term enough in the wrong context, it empowers the wrong people. You understand what I mean?
You want to explain that a little more for the listeners?
Yes.
Some people mightn't get that. I think you need to explain that.
So if we use the term in the incorrect context, like, we know what we're saying, but if we use the term in the incorrect context, especially because a lot of people, cultural appropriation has become a buzz term, yes, right? Particularly for social media, etc. But for those of us who are actually creatives, who are delving into creative thought and creative academia and all that kind of stuff, we have to be mindful how we use the term, because using what we have internationally recognized as cultural appropriation in terms of dominant culture, in terms of, and also just anybody of any other race or ethnicity or religion, etc., using, wearing, performing anything that has to do with someone else's, people brand it as cultural appropriation without understanding the nuance of it. But when you're talking about the headache making, like, attempt that is trying to define Caribbean identity, like, you will get a headache because we're still not sure exactly what it means. It continues to evolve. But what we do know is that it is, I keep saying it is multi-hyphenate. It is complex. There is diverse. To say it is diverse is an understatement because of how many people are a melting pot in this region. And all the peoples who came have affected each other. We've assimilated each other. There's a difference between assimilation, between as I said, homage and cultural retention. There's a difference between, and a lot of the assimilation also happened out of need to survive. You understand? So when people talk the gaslighty response to, for instance, people talking about, let's go back to the hair thing.
In there.
Where people say, yes, but Black people wear weave. But why? I mean, weave and hair artistry is something that you can find on the continent, absolutely. But in terms of this westernized context, where relaxers and frying your hair and hot comb and weave and all of these things, we had to assimilate in order to survive, in order to be accepted into certain spaces. And as a result, it became a part of the cultural iconography, if you want to call it that, because Black women are fabulous with their hair. We do all kind of things with our hair. You understand what I mean? So there's that. The same thing with something as carnival. It's not a matter of whether we have license to appropriate. It's a matter of carnival within Trinidad and Tobago and across the diaspora. We could argue about where the genesis of the carnival really came from. We could argue about that. We could talk about it. But we have affected each other. We have assumed certain traits, certain cultural practices from each other. And now it's one big whole melting pot. What I would underline is that when we do certain things, that we always provide context, especially as creatives. When you do something, provide context. Don't just do something blanketly out in a vacuum and it has no sort of artistic integrity, which will allow people to run with all sorts of interpretations of what it is you're doing. So, you know.
Yeah,
Fantastic.
and somebody made a point about the same, going back to the same Indian mass we talked about in Canada, where somebody did make an objection about it. But you know, one of the things that as you talk about carnival and our culture, intrinsic in our culture is parody, is you know,
yes.
And it's also, when you go back to old time carnival, a lot of our themes were historical. So you would have a whole set of people playing Egypt. They had a man in Pharaoh, you had all that. George Bailey was the exponent of this kind of historical mass. In today's context, would he be considered an appropriator? Or is it just that we know as a people that we express what we see? We're influenced by things that we see. People will tell you now that they think carnival is influenced by Victoria's Secrets. That may be the case. But I think within our own carnival is that ability to portray things. That is why carnival, you know, has categories. Fantasy, historical, topical, right? You know, so I don't think it's about having a license to appropriate. I think it's just the way that we portray things. Carnival is about portrayal.
Portrayal, excellent. I mean, the whole notion of the transgression, you know, and the ability to represent freely different cultures. For me, carnival is such a powerful space. But I want to zero in back into the notion of us in the Caribbean being able to appropriate, which is in itself a problematic term. I'm going back to the story about the locks and the fact that for me, as an Afro-Trinbagonian, it really meant a lot to me to grow my locks as a form of African identity, as a form of connection. I didn't have to wear African clothes. My locks alone represented me, that Africanness that I wanted to express. Coming into Jamaica to further my studies, and gaining an understanding of what Rastafarianism means in this particular context, understanding I remember just graduating from undergrad in 2005 and going for a job interview with my locks, and I was told I had to cut my hair in Jamaica. I came back to Trinidad in 2006 and I worked at the Ministry of Labor. No problems. And I had my locks grew longer and I got more compliments and I continued to be promoted. Coming back to Jamaica 10 years later, still that's the way Rastafarians, although they've made significant strides, within that practice, within a Jamaican context, there's still a lot of marginalization. There's still a lot of oppression. Recently, there's a case of a 18-year-old girl whose locks were cut in a police station, right? And that was done to discipline her, to get her in line. One can also argue to civilize, because coming out of the there's a strong Christian tradition that looks down on some of those forms of expression like Rastafarianism, right? So within the context, having a deeper understanding, I just had to cut my hair. I had to cut it because I was a renter dread in this context. I was a renter dread. I was someone who was a fashion locks, trying to exploit I knew why I grew my hair and having an understanding of history. But even within the Caribbean, that expression that I saw within Trinidad as a powerful source of identity, in Jamaica, I had to cut it because I recognized that I don't want to use the word appropriate, because I do appreciate, right, the culture, because this notion of appreciation versus appropriation. But understanding it after immersing myself and doing my research, I just had to cut it, So that's just one example. And then the other thing I want to say is, when you look at dancehall, I mean, I don't know what your views are of the use of dancehall within the Caribbean context. Because I love love is a strong word. I am observing.
If you love the dancehall, say love the dancehall. No big
the dancehall. Yeah, no man, big up to Tiffany and all these other persons who doing their thing.
The Trinidad is what you're talking about.
Big up
all the way in Jamaica.
So this is it's interesting, because while you're talking, I'm thinking about several things. Which one example I will give is something that goes beyond Trinidad. And it reminded me when Paul Simon teamed up with Lady Smith, Black Mambazo. There was a debate back then about, oh God, who Paul Simon think he is, A lot of debate when the album came out. But eventually what people came to realize, that opened so many doors for South African musicians and African musicians as a whole. As a result, the whole world music scene actually changed, because Paul Simon's intention was not to exploit Lady Smith, Black Mambazo, it was to uplift them. So by the same token, you're talking about your locks, right? Plenty women love a Rasta man. The reason that they love a Rasta man is because they see a Rastafarian as a man with strength. They see oftentimes a Rasta man as somebody who has a particular kind of belief and a particular kind of lifestyle that they want to live. So they are drawn to that, right? There's so many, I have looked at so many people over the years who have grown locks because it identifies them with an African identity. And in fact, for them, it's uplifting rather than in Jamaica. And I found it difficult to understand in Jamaica at first why they thought about it like that. But then I recognize that the whole notion of Rastafarianism is something that they are still struggling with. For us, it's about, it look good, it's beautiful, you feel like a black person when you wear your dreads. And that's something that within the Caribbean is something that we have to deal with that as it comes. Because I find it strange that Jamaicans are still cutting hair. And that case with the 18-year-old girl was...
Listen.
Oh,
I mean, I'm sitting here as the elephant in the room with this whole big head of hair.
Yes.
And I understand where you're coming from, Alpha. Like, I understand why you had that, you had that moment of realization, I guess, in Jamaica. I don't think that's the road I would have chosen to walk. Because for me, my hair, as you said, is I mean, I love my hair. But I also understand the politics of my hair. And sometimes you understand that revolution and rebellion comes from those personal choices too that you choose to make by just walking into a room and how you present. You literally you say something without having to say anything. So there's that in it for me. And Rastafarianism is not the only traditional belief system to which holds on to this, and being walking the path of traditional African spirituality myself, this takes on a whole new meaning. You know, the more that I learn, I'm still learning. I'm a baby in the thing in comparison to many. So I'm still learning, but I understand crown. I understand entrance of head.
The crown chakra.
Yes. Yeah, what? I understand that. So for somebody, when I heard that story of that 18-year-old girl whose locks was cut, that is violence.
Yes.
That is violence against someone.
Violence and
police officer in custody.
Listen to me.
He was in custody.
I heard that story and I said, somebody.
Self-loathing, self-loathing. But let us not. Yeah.
But nonetheless, just to bring it back again, Locke, George Bailey, etc. Like, I love that question you posed in terms of would George Bailey be accused of cultural appropriation? And again, context and time and space is a hell of a thing, because the time that George Bailey had his heyday, the time when Sparrow was king and Kitchener was king, and even my Uncle Leroy, you understand, their heyday in terms of what they would have sang about, how they would have couched it, what George Bailey would have chosen to portray. The time and our understanding of things are different. And it's not just the understanding, the politics, the global politics has also changed. You understand what I mean? So sometimes when we use those things as either points of reference to validate or undercut something, we always have to be mindful of really listening to what people say and when they're using those references and the context in which they use those references. Because what George Bailey did can't be likened to what a lot of the mass is now. You know what I mean? And I am a masquerader to my heart. Everybody know that.
Yes.
I've been to Kiddies Carnival since I was in a stroller. You understand? And coming up through the ranks, I played enough bikini and beads mass. All I wanted to do was be naked in town for 2 days, because there was a freedom to that. You understand? And everybody's carnival experience is different.
Yes.
People go through different phases. They evolve. Now I want all the frou-frou. I want all. Give me all the cloth. Give me I want all. Right? And that's because of where I'm at right about now and understanding. You grow. If you're the same person that you were with the same level of understanding that you had a decade ago, then you are stagnant, and that's a problem. So I could safely say, having played bikini and bead mask and knowing that it was more about just the freedom of body for me, as opposed to really bearing in mind what I'm playing. Emerald of the sea. What that mean? Which sea? What emerald?
Yes.
Who? You understand what I mean? When it's really about the feather is this color, emerald is this, or emerald of the sea. And to me, that's where the problem comes in, where you could end up in the khaki pants of cultural appropriation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because you are making, when you have a very fabulous, sexy carnival outfit and you say, you know what would make this even better? I'll go in and throw a big Indian headpiece on it and put it as the front line and make everybody pay real money to upgrade. That is a problem.
Yeah.
That's a problem. And we have to start recognizing that is where the problem lies. It's not that we can't play Indian, but when we do it without it having the level of integrity that it needs to have culturally in terms of how we represent it. And that's when we have to start asking the questions of who controls our narratives as creatives.
Yes.
Who controls our narratives? And what do those narratives say about us? What messages are they sending, subliminal and otherwise? That's when those are the questions. That's the kind of conversation I'm interested in. It has to be nuanced.
I have to tell you that somebody on my own personal chat just said, yes, Abeo hit the nail on the head. I want to talk about messages and go back to what Alpha was talking about with relation to dance hall.
Yeah.
So let's just say when I was younger, right, which was a few years ago.
Not long.
Reggae was a very contentious thing in Trinidad and Tobago. I remember once going to a shadow concert, and I can't remember which reggae theme song he had. And he started to sing it and people started to complain. So we grew up in a kind of schizophrenic kind of space where we loved Bob Marley, we loved Peter Tosh, but we couldn't, Sparrow, Shadow, Orlando, come and sing them thing. That is not for we, right? But it has come full circle now to the fact that in order for young people, it seems to appropriately express the depth of the feelings that they have about society, they've chosen dancehall and reggae. And I don't think that that's appropriation. I think it's the fact that we are so enmeshed in each other's cultures that is the way it is. I have to admit, I have railed against it in private. Why these young fellas are using calypso, or why they're not trying to find their own fusion, why they're using reggae. I would admit that. But it is a fact that if they probably see reggae associated with a kind of sacredness, maybe associated with a kind of higher form of communication than what our own music is. But I think it's something that it shows that, you know, Jamaican music has proven itself in their minds to be the circuit by which they would want to express their views on who they are.
Okay. I want to make 2 points. One in reference to the notion of the impact of reggae. I mean, growing up, seeing the Kiss Kitty Caravan, that's when I came to my senses and awareness about the different cultural forms. On television, you start to see the Jamaican dancehall videos, with Buju Banton, etc. But coming out of the Kiss Kitty Caravan, this raging debate about, you know, why this use of Jamaican culture, why are the announcers sounding Jamaican, why are they playing so much dancehall music? And I had the experience because unlike Abeo, I mean, I didn't get the chance to play Kiddies Carnival, although I played the Naked Mass in later age. And when I told my friends, the next time I play Mass, I'm coming home to play a sailor with all stars, they asked me if I go mad. But it's that being out of Trinidad, I can regain that understanding. But just to say, I grew up in Calypso, right? A lot of the Calypso competitions, particularly with NJAC that they used to put on. And I remember one of the auditions for the Young King competition, and Bunji Garlin came in. So in that particular, the late 90s, you had some of these younger artists saying, you know what, let me legitimize myself within Calypso and then continue further. And he sang a song entitled, he won the title with a song called Blessing, all right, which is a dancehall infused Calypso, if you want to call it that, because some people say that is not Calypso at all. But he also sang a song called Some Boy Want to Play Traffic Police and Hold On Me Accent. So he used the Hyundai accent car as a metaphor for the use of Jamaican forms of expression to highlight what he's going through. So this connection with the culture, this Caribbean connection, to me, it's embraced by a lot of the younger artists. All right, it's embraced by a lot of the younger artists, and we saw, for me, I'm fascinated by Bunji Garlin and some of the others who some may argue that they commercially utilize. I don't know if it's without permission. Nobody really owns the accent, but that Jamaican expression is also us, just as the Calypso and the soca is also Jamaican, because the mento and the ska, if you listen to the mento,
of course. It was invented by Trinidadian.
That's right.
In the evolution of Jamaican musical forms. So at one point, Calypso was ruling the Caribbean and played a major role within pop. This whole Harry Belafonte movement and the Roman Coca-Cola, etc. Mento, not so much mento, but the ska. When you listen to the beats and the rhythms, there are probably some Ghanaians and Nigerians who could claim a connection to High Life.
Yes, I was about to think about High Life. And Sparrow is highly regarded. Sparrow and Kitchener are highly regarded in Nigeria and Ghana in that High Life culture. And that is why so many Trinis of a certain age understand and appreciate the role of Fela Kuti.
Oh, yes.
You know, so again, like how we use Afrobeats now in soca. Is that appropriation, or is that just a natural evolution?
It's a natural evolution, because to me, Afrobeats is us.
Yes,
Afrobeats is us. It's us. We are Afrobeats, and Afrobeats is us. You know what I mean? What you do, however, is if you are creating an Afrobeat, so to speak, a rhythm that is very reminiscent that or pulls from that whole Afrobeat thing. For me, what you do is you credit.
Yes.
Credit where
Let's
credit
just talk about that. Let's talk about
the thing and don't credit. But
yes,
I just want to go back to that whole thing about reggae and why young people have always seemed to gravitate more towards the reggae, at least in my era. I grew up in the maxi dub era.
Yes.
Giving away my age. But for me, there's a militancy that is attached to reggae and dancehall. It is clear. They don't hide it. It's there. There's a militancy that a lot of young people gravitate towards because they're young, they're figuring out themselves. It gives them a certain kind of agency that maybe they feel that calypso and soca doesn't give them, which is not necessarily true. And I think the disconnect is such that somewhere along the line, we stopped teaching the history of calypso and soca and from whence it came and out of what traditions it came, so that young people would understand that calypso is just as militant and could be even more so than the reggae form. You understand what I mean? And if we're talking about calypso being I know that there may be some Jamaicans who might, not necessarily agree, but in terms of calypso being the genesis for a lot of the musical forms that come out of the Caribbean.
Yes, for sure.
What Bunji does in terms of raga soca, you understand? Raga soca came out of the rhythm of the word and the power of the word. We call it rapso music.
Mm-hmm.
We have our own rap writing of rhythm within our musical forms. But again, it's about who controls narrative.
Yes.
Because when certain groups control narratives, that's when certain cultural retentions are lost, and why we end up having disconnects where young people would rather gravitate towards the Jamaican culture, which is not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, we could talk about local content and the necessity of local content within our space so that we could create a creative ecosystem that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, if we're talking about there's no pan-Caribbean cultural identity per se in terms of a clear running line across the Caribbean in terms of purely language and religion and all that kind of stuff. But the one thing that there is a definite Caribbean aesthetic or identity, if you want to call it, is within our cultural expressions, which is why it is so easy for us to gravitate towards the dancehall. It's why it fits, why soca will play so seamlessly in all of the other islands. You understand what I mean? And I don't think that is something that we should fight or that we should label as appropriation.
Exactly.
Yes.
Thank you. I remember back in the early 2000s when I was in Jamaica, and you would hear 2 songs or 3 songs. Tempted to Touch by Rupee, you would hear Little, Kevin Little, right? And probably one Marshall or one Destra. And within the parties, within the creative spaces, there was not that appreciation. But then coming back later and experiencing the appreciation and a very much increased appreciation for I want to say Caribbean culture, because it's not just Trinidad doesn't we may dominate the soca, but we don't own it. There are many of the other Caribbean islands who now have found a space within the Jamaican culture. But there was also another argument, read the dancehall. Of course, dancehall has influenced spaces in the diaspora, hip-hop music, etc., where the notion of the use of the dancehall speak or that way of chanting that influenced the emergence of hip-hop music. Some may argue that
hip-hop was invented by a Jamaican.
It's totally us.
It's just us. It's just us.
Don't let them lie to you. It's totally us.
You
found
a few years ago when what's his name, Justin Bieber and some of these other artists.
Yes.
Within pop, where the dancehall beats were predominantly Jamaican, not necessarily. I don't want to say paying homage or giving credence to, because even that beat is a hybrid form that borrows from other cultures. But
not really connecting with Jamaica. Jamaicans were saying, but hey, you're using our music. You're using our music, and we are not necessarily benefiting. Now, it's not true that they didn't benefit, because of course, more Jamaican producers started to emerge within that pop space.
Mm-hmm.
There was a greater demand as hip hop tries to diversify its sound and reach newer audiences. You saw where the Jamaican producers were producing across Latin America, the reggaeton. All right, they were going to Africa. So it's not just the artists, but it's also the sound. When you have Japanese who come to and win the dancehall queen competition in Jamaica, and you have Japanese who win the world reggae song clash, right? Mighty Krong, etc. Is that appropriation? No, not necessarily. It's appreciation.
I think with Japan it is highly and huge appreciation, because I have met some Japanese people who kill them dead. They could grow that afro.
Let me tell you.
Right, and they could do, and they don't see it as appropriation. And I think because we have to really look at the Japanese case in a way that they have furthered where Caribbean music has gone. Steel band, for example, the steel band in Japan is a huge thing. But the thing about it is, again, crediting. At any point does anybody say, and I know it might be a weird argument, that steel band is from Trinidad, the people will say, well, people know where the guitar come from. But I mean, I think that there's something that has crediting is a big part of this. And lack of credit is the problem, as Abeo had said. Lack of credit is the problem. How do we do what, and within the Caribbean space, are we crediting each other enough?
No.
We're
not. We definitely need to do a better job of crediting each other. And we also, and that would go a very long way for us fostering a stronger identity as a diaspora, because there's power in diaspora. Like if we really got it together and really started to flesh out what diaspora truly means, I mean, again, complex, we probably will never come, it will never be just one thing. But I think if we are going in that direction, because diaspora is becoming a buzzword. People are talking about it more. What does that mean? How does it benefit us? What in terms of group identity? I think if we credited each other more, it would definitely go a long way in terms of strengthening those connections. However, and I mean, in terms of also protecting our cultural heritage, both as a collective and as a group, because I know Jamaica has done it. I know Barbados has done it with regards to those two countries in particular, with regards to certain aspects of their cultural heritage. They are protected under the UN Charter that protects cultural heritage. It makes it intangible cultural heritage, right? And there is an irony of going to the UN, which technically is like a representative of the colonial empire in a lot of ways, to protect what is ours, that we had to fight to retain as a result of the colonial enterprise. So there's an irony to that, yes. But then at the same time, in the midst of all of that, there's this idea of gatekeeping. And I don't think gatekeeping is a bad thing. Gatekeeping is important. Because I feel as though, I mean, yes, we could talk about the Japanese love what we do, there's a certain excitement. People's eyes light up when you see a Japanese woman, per se, bubbling and doing the same wine and split on her head that a black girl from Jamaica or a girl from up Lavantil might, you understand? But somehow their eyes don't light up in the same way when the girl from Jamaica and the girl from Lavantil do it. And that is a problem.
Yes. So you're thinking that the things that are associated with black expression, that I think you may have said the word where people think it's vulgar. People might think, yes. So it's that whole thing of black sexuality, which is threatening to black people and others. In our context, when somebody else does it, it's tempered, it's cool.
Exactly.
Okay.
And for
I
me,
hear
that's where gatekeeping comes in. It's also, so for instance, they love our steel pan. They love it. And that was wonderful. But they love it so much that they take it.
you.
You understand what I mean? Where somebody else have the pattern for it. At what point do we say, okay, I see you appreciating what we have. I see you. I appreciate that you appreciate. However, mash, break, slow your roll. When, at what
Yeah.
point do we say that?
Can we still say that though? Is that something we can still say? Because I think, this might not go down well with a lot of people, but I think the horse has left the stable in a lot of ways where that is concerned.
Yeah.
So I think what we need to do as a nation is we need to really project more of what our own is in a different way, rather than telling them, all right, yeah. I feel that we need to be more creative in the way we express our ownership of things.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, yes, Alpha, go ahead.
I want to make the point that where you see the whole notion of cultural appropriation, where power is concerned, and the infringement of intellectual property.
Right,
just that very word to many of the persons, to some persons in the industry, you want the freedom to be able to build on creative expressions wherever they emerge. But then in you creating your expression, where are the protections? Where are the protections? We have done an abysmal job, in my opinion, of furthering the intellectual property regime in terms of we've been very reactive to protect the heritage that Abeo is speaking about. Not only the patents for steel pan, in Jamaica, they've had to patent the flag because there were persons all over the world were using it without permission and for commercial benefit, many of them not having done any research. Just a point on the Japanese and why I applaud them. They are in the ghettos walking through Kingston. They come and they do the research. They come and they go into the creative spaces, and they also create. They have become part of the dance hall diaspora. I'm not familiar with the pan itself, but as a part of the dance hall diaspora, you have persons from Jamaica and downtown Kingston going to conduct lessons and classes. You have a lot of the producers going and working with Japanese, the sound, etc. So there is this sense of camaraderie and collaboration.
So there's an exchange, and so it's not that the Japanese are benefiting solely from being able to produce pan. Some are, but do you feel that there's largely an exchange that benefits Jamaica?
Yes. But in terms of protecting, we've been extremely reactive. And another point, look, a simple example. Just 2 weeks ago, we all know that Bob Marley, based on his music, he grew up in Trenchtown in downtown Jamaica. The house that he lived in was burnt down. There were 4 different groups of tenants residing in the space. All right. And so it makes you wonder if we see the home of Bob Marley. Yes, he has a statue. Yes, he has a statue or 2 or 3. But the home that he grew up in, I mean, we as cultural critics, as advocates, as Abeo is, or as activists, which we probably need to become, the home of Marcus Garvey, that is the one of the first national heroes of Jamaica. The state has failed to really protect these tangible spaces. But you're talking about, okay, there's no home for dancehall music. At one point, so if you come to Jamaica, where is the space outside of the Bob Marley family protecting his home on Hope Road where the museum exists? That's it, the family, a private initiative. Outside of some of those private initiatives, the culture industry has been left to its own. There's been very little investment and support where the intellectual property regime is concerned, which leaves the door open or the gate open, to use Abeo's analogy of the gatekeepers.
Yeah.
There are very few gatekeepers, in my opinion. And if they are, they're probably not in the right spaces. We need to get into the right spaces to advocate for the protection of our tangible and intangible heritage. Otherwise, this argument about appropriation, not necessarily within, because we seem to, especially with technology, us never having been to the other islands, being exposed to the culture a lot more. In Jamaica, I'm saying that there's been a wider appreciation for Caribbean culture that 10, 20 years ago, as an undergrad student, I did not experience. But outside, looking outside, us operating as Jamaica or Trinidad and Tobago or Barbados, each with our forms of expression that we share, that we use in our own evolution, ideologically, and based on identity. It's just not enough. We need to protect our own creative forms of expression. Even if you think about filmmaking, a good friend of mine, rest in peace, Chappie, Franklin, St. also called Chappie, a filmmaker, Trinidad origination, one of the pioneers in Jamaica filmmaking sector. He once thought of, where is the Caribbean film aesthetic? What's a Caribbean film aesthetic? What's a Caribbean? So I see Abeo raising a hand. I'm not the expert. I'm just throwing that out there in a mischievous way.
That wasn't necessarily me raising my hand. That was a praise dance.
But interestingly enough, right, a lot of people within the Caribbean don't understand and don't appreciate people like Horace Ove, who thankfully the film festival has been paying homage to for the longest while, and this year he is the focus of a tribute. But you're right, when we look at films and stuff like Small Axe, for example, Steve McQueen, he brought a very, yes, of course it was produced at British production values, the BBC, Netflix, whatever, they had those values, but there's a certain way that I think he captured the Caribbeanness of the characters within it and that we could relate to. And, I feel that we as Caribbean people, we need to appreciate what our forms are. So you see, I've been film festival ever since I came back to Trinidad, and I've loved it. And I've always said, what we do very well is we are very good at the cinematography. We're very good at everything technical and buzzy, and it looks nice. It looks like it comes from here. But we don't ever, but sometimes our storytelling is not complete. And I feel that for us to really develop that Caribbean aesthetic, we need to learn to tell the story properly. I would say that people like Storm Salter, yes, fantastic. That whole group, fantastic. But yet, I think there still needs to be more work done about telling our stories in our way properly, rather than depending on the whiz-bangery to make it,
Woo!
Yes, we're ready for you.
We have this thing about always wanting outside validation.
Yes.
That is our thing. We always work from the outside in instead of the inside out. So we busy talking about how can we infiltrate foreign markets and with what? With what though? What I don't understand. This is the focus of the research that I've just decided to embark on again at UE, because apparently my life is about getting degrees. I don't know what this is about Black women and degrees, but here we are.
Validation.
So it's like, for me, in terms of that word aesthetic, now taking it from my sweet spot as an actor, as a director, producer, etc. And we go to drama school. I went to the British Conservatory, and you learn all of these, for instance, acting and directing techniques that have all these old, ageable, knowledgeable European white men's names attached to it. The Chekhovs and the Stanislavskis, etc., etc. And that's fine. That's okay. That's fine. Where are the techniques from the Caribbean?
Yes.
Where are the technique? Now there are two techniques that have just emerged, Black techniques that have emerged, but it's from a North American, Black American experience perspective, which is fine. But we have been training actors and creating content in Trinidad and Tobago and the Caribbean diaspora since the time we could walk, but we've belittled what we've done for so long. You know what I mean? we make things like Best Village the butt of a joke. When Best Village has produced some of the brilliant minds, we don't want to see nobody who in theater and Best Village and tongue theater on film, because this is different to that. And no,
when in the UK and in the United States, people who come from theater are the ones who make why do you think black British actors are making such an impact in the United States?
The American circuit right now, dominating so much so that the Americans are blue vex.
Yes, of course.
Right? But because of the fact that we want that outside validation, so we've been trying to emulate what they do outside, as opposed to that developing our own aesthetic, particularly for screen. And it's I mean, maybe now we are a little bit more open to it in terms of talking about who controls the narrative. As you said, telling our stories properly. You can't tell a story if you don't know it.
Mm-hmm.
You can't tell the story if you don't know it. So if there are certain people with deeper pockets who are so moved to want to become patrons for the arts, particularly, let's say in this context, because it's a film festival for screen in Trinidad and Tobago and the wider Caribbean, etc., then you have a social responsibility to make sure that you are funding people who are invested in telling those stories with integrity, as opposed to people who enter the glitz, the glam, and who have the most followers. You understand what I mean? Putting social media influencers on screen, I guess that's fine. It's fine. It's a mood. It's a thing.
It's fine for now, for the moment.
It's cool, I guess. But is that sustainable?
No.
Is that sustainable?
You're right. Like we look at films that don't come to the film festival either because the makers don't feel a part of that, like Jeffrey, oh God, I keep forgetting his name, Warlock, the guy who made the movie Warlock, which is a really good movie. But then if you take it a little step further and you look at what comes out of certain communities, like for example, the guys who did the Kokiai, they remember the thing about the Kokiai criminal whose picture was put up on the wanted thing on TV, and everybody went off on that. And what was telling to me was how many really good stories, comedic stories, came out as memes and as whatever. And I'm like, but we could do it.
Yeah.
We just maybe we overthinking it.
Yeah.
But there's a style of making comedic things that we have mastered.
So
that we should really be. That should be a technique, as you say, Abeo.
It should be a technique, and this is what. And the thing is, the groundwork for the creation of the technique is there. It's not necessarily that somebody is needs to start from scratch. It's a matter of curating for me at this point. We have various styles, we have various techniques. We have people in Trinidad and Tobago who are luminaries and practitioners who never necessarily stepped inside of a conservatory a day in their lives. But through experience and, of course, natural instinct, they have curated techniques within the Caribbean region for training our creatives, for creating content that we've dismissed largely. We've largely dismissed it. And a lot of people feel when we talk about local content and Caribbean technique and create Caribbean aesthetic that it means it must be some deep historical, philosophical something. No, we funny. I had the pleasure of being one of the judges for the writing intensive that oh gosh, Creative TT would have just done. And the kinds of stories, our Caribbean imagination is boundless. That is the ecosystem. That's it right there. Sorry, I got it in
No. This I deliberately put that in there because I know it would have pinched a nerve, and bring out that and reconnect it to the film festival. But just to say, I mean, not being an expert or a filmmaker, but someone appreciating film. Two of the best local films that I've seen connect around one in Trinidad that spoke about doubles you know, the making of the doubles, right? And the telling of that story and how around food, you are able now to encompass different cultural experiences.
Food is a thing.
In Jamaica, I'm referring to, you know, my friend again, Franklin St. Juice, who he was part of a production. In fact, he acted in it, a short film around two parties. So persons in a line trying to get a party, you know, and the ways in which through our ill discipline, you know, people come from the back, they just want to go to the front. How these very simple scenarios tell our stories. I'm not suggesting, Abeo, that these are specific techniques that are not borrowing from external experiences, but I'm speaking more about telling our story. And if we tell it enough, I believe that we will continue to evolve an aesthetic. You know, we will evolve an aesthetic. But the other point I want to make, bringing it back to my area of the policy, is that working in Trinidad Ministry of Culture, the Division of Culture, seeing the great work they have done there with little to no money. We give lip service to culture, all right? Now, yes, Trinidad has made significant strides in terms of legislative mandate, in terms of funding, creating a registry, trying to now develop an industry. Jamaica has done some of that as well. However, there are things that Trinidad's doing, but that Jamaica isn't doing. There are things that Jamaica is doing in terms of their infrastructure from the 70s. Their cultural infrastructure is really quite advanced, but then with limited resources, or no resources for that matter of fact. Little funding. The government is really unable or not playing the role. I shouldn't say unable. They're not playing the role as the gatekeepers. So it's the private sector. It's the family,
and
individuals who now have had to step up. That to me isn't sustainable. That is not sustainable.
So let me ask you something. So what you're saying is that the government now, as we bring it back to the whole appropriation thing and about our intellectual property, this should be something that you think has to become a cornerstone of developing the industry as we go forward. Protect us, because, you know, the point Abeo made about us wanting to be so good for the external market puts us at risk of our stuff being appropriated.
You
know, I think there's something that there is a story to that, you know.
And we need to think more as a region. We need to share and learn from the lessons. There are things that happening in Barbados. There are things happening in Barbados at some time about 10 years ago when Bajan artists went on strike and said, no, you're not playing enough of our music. You're not playing enough of our music. And the government had to step in and negotiate with the media to say, here's what. We're not telling you have to play, you know, but if you don't play, you're not getting our funding because government spends a lot of money.
Yes, they do. Of course, all governments spend money on media.
Exactly. Right. So the policy of the government at that time, I'm not sure if it's still like that, encouraged the promotion of local content. It helped to really develop the industry. So there are things happening, but we're operating in silos. And when we go outside, people still asking me which part of Jamaica I'm from. When I show them Trinidad, they still asking me which part of Jamaica I'm from. All right? There are lessons that we can learn, and we need to further the industry, Caribbean creative industry, by sharing and learning from our experiences. Because as a region, we have power in the global market. We are being appropriated every day. But when I hear Mia Motley, she's my prime minister. I'm sorry, I'm in Jamaica. And
all of us.
She's a regional prime minister.
She's a regional prime minister, yeah.
Thank you. And with limited resources, I'm seeing how she has given a voice that I can connect to, that I relate to, not being physically in that space, but that's the power of the Caribbean. That's the power that we have. When she speaks, she's the chairman, is she, of CARICOM?
Not at this time.
No, it's Antigua now.
No.
Doesn't matter to me. Gaston Brown, all respect to him. I give him respect. And I respect Andrew Holness and Keith Rowley. But Mia Motley, when she speaks on a global stage, I feel represented.
Right. So
that we
I
have.
want to bring it back to a point that Mia Motley made, and this is in our final minutes. We have to talk about how cultural confidence plays, the role cultural confidence plays in our own appreciation for what we are doing so that we don't have to appropriate anything from anywhere.
We've never, I don't think our instinct, our creative instinct in the region, in the main, has never been to appropriate from anywhere else outside of the region. We may borrow from each other, we may pay homage to each other, we may not have been doing a particularly good job of crediting each other, but I mean, and yes, we have issues where, because of the influence of pop culture and mainstream and social media, where yes, there is that very American influence on certain things, yes, but in terms of cultural influences that have been really sustaining, that have stood the test of time and continue to stand the test of time, they are uniquely us, which is why everybody wants to take what we have. You understand? When we, and this is why I keep saying, we need to, as you said, truly appreciate what we have, the way we talk, our rhythms, etc., etc. You know, this idea of Queen's English is all well and good and wonderful, but there is beauty in our nation languages. You know, I learned the other day, we don't say patois and dialect anymore. Nation languages. Yes, because we're always learning. I learned something. And when we are hesitant to, we are still hesitant to put our nation languages on our national platforms. Let's even think about that for a moment. We are hesitant to do that, which in a lot of ways we are still lauding what has been handed to us through colonialism. And I'm not saying there isn't merit, of course, in having a grasp and being able to code switch and all of that kind of stuff. But because of the fact that we are still so caught up in the outside and what was and how outside will interpret us, I think we need to understand, you know, Wendell Manwaring have a thing he just say, you don't know, and you don't know that you don't know.
Mm-hmm.
You understand what I mean? You don't know, and you don't know that you don't know. So then how other people will know? You understand what I mean? How will other people know from whence it comes? Everybody can identify Jamaican nation language. It's easily identifiable. Americans do a particularly poor job of trying to replicate it in mainstream
yes, they do. Comedy and stuff, yeah.
Terrible. When there's a dialect coach on set, there are no, and that's another thing. Where are the dialect coaches from the Caribbean for the mainstream spaces? Where are our dialect coaches? Because again, people feel as though they could just paint with a broad brush. But for instance, if Jamaican nation language is particularly identifiable, are we to the point where we can begin to identify the various nation languages and accents from around the Caribbean within the region? We're not even at that point yet.
Yeah, true.
We're not even at that point yet. So until we start to appreciate we and know about we and invest in we, it will be very easy for people to come and pick off.
Yes, exactly. That's a point. Yeah.
That they like, because we don't even realize they're picking it off. We don't even realize that they're picking it off. Yeah. So,
what do you think, Obika?
I have to agree. Leaving, departing from that term that you use, we appreciate and we. I believe that moving forward to combat this notion of cultural appropriation and to find our voice within this globalized space, we need to take intellectual property seriously, and we need to start to value. We need to value our own culture and culture as a region to support each other. I'll give you one example. In Jamaica's broadcasting policy, national music or national content is content from the Caribbean region. In the Trinidad and Tobago broadcasting policy, national refers to Trinidad and Tobago, but it refers to it defers to a broadcasting regulation that still does not exist. So, in other words, in Trinidad and Tobago, the media landscape is left up to its own freedoms to decide to broadcast whatever they want. If we are to take creative expression seriously, we have to now utilize the tools available to develop a sense of self, a greater appreciation for our own culture. So, intellectual property, for me, is one of the way forwards, but must begin with value. And if you were to look at how much money the governments in the Caribbean, look at Trinidad and Tobago, how much money does it truly spend on the cultural and creative industry? All right. That tells you. And in Jamaica, it's abysmal. I mean, of course, there are economic challenges. But as a region, I believe that there is a lot more we can do to facilitate the movement of the creatives, the sharing of the stories, to utilize the media that we have. We own a lot of the, I mean, yes, we don't own the internet, but even utilizing the internet as a space to tell our story and so that when I'm growing up, I'm learning about the history of the different islands. The language, oh my goodness, you hit the nail on the head. I'm not sure. Sometimes a Bayesian sound like a Guyanese to me. Sometimes a Jamaican. Every accent they hear in the Caribbean, okay, this is a stereotype. It sounds Trini. Every other accent that is heard, we still do not know each other. So it's difficult to really say, okay, we can move forward as a region where even amongst us, there's so much skepticism and ill will, mistrust for our very institutions, right? I'll use the CCJ as a metaphor for what we are in the region. I mean, so that alone tells you that, yes, we value having our own court. We value it. We spend the money. We have the headquarters in Trinidad, but we're still not a part of it. In Jamaica, there's this raging argument about the Queen being the head of state, right? And the notion that, you know, in many ways, financially, Jamaica is still a colony in many ways, right? Beholden to the IMF and the World Bank, and now the Chinese, some people say, right? But there is the one thing that I want to leave with. For me, I feel culturally confident that we are resilient. And that's it. So it may take a while, but I believe that we will get there because we are resilient by nature.
Wow. And down on the button of 11:30. Wow, you are good. This has been a really engaging, energizing, exciting. I wish we could have talked for a little more. We need some drinks next time to do it, Tennille. So part two. But thank you for this. Thank you for this discussion, Alpha and Abeo. I hope that our listeners, viewers were as energized as I was, and I hope that people come away now with a greater sense of who we are, what we need to do, and how we need to protect and love our own thing. Tennille?
Yes, thank you, Franka, and thank you, Abeo and Alpha. That was quite an in-depth discussion. I think our viewers seem to really enjoy it. Okay. So thank you very much. And just to remind everybody, this panel was brought to you with the support of Shell, Trinidad and Tobago Limited. If you have any feedback for us, feel free to email me, admin@filmco.org. If you do happen to post on social media, please tag us so we can remain connected to you all. On behalf of the TTFF, I'd like to thank everybody again for participating, audience, Alpha, Abeo, Franka, and we hope to see you all at other events throughout the festival. Thanks again. Bye.